Welcome back. Time for a closer look at some of the news making a buzz in the region and beyond. And today my guest is Matthew Driskill, Senior Editor of Reuters News Agency. Thanks for joining us today, Matthew. Now, let's start with our first story. This one's from China Daily. Scientists search for clear answers on smog. Certainly no shortage of research seems to be being done. What were the standout issues, did you think?
Well, they got a big problem. I mean, it's very simple. They've got a huge problem, not just with air pollution, but with water pollution. You know, the entire environment in China, in mainland China, you've got huge problems there. And some of the stats that we were looking at, I mean, going way back to 2005, MIT did a study that said air pollution costs China $112 billion a year, cost to the economy. We've done some stories at Reuters as well, where they're talking about, in order to combat pollution, they're going to spend over $800 million a year, or something. I think it's 800 million. It's more like 800 billion. I think I got the wrong thing there. So, you know, they've just got a huge problem. In China's defense, I will say that they are not alone, and it's simply a matter of this is their time of industrialization. Their economy has been going gangbusters ever since it opened up. And Europe had problems back when it was industrializing. The United States has had its problems when it was industrializing. In 1969, there was a river called the Cuyahoga River in Ohio that actually caught fire because it was so polluted. So it's not unusual, and I think China actually is trying to do something, but the scale of the problem is just huge.
But in the article, they're identifying the particular effects of different types of pollution. So what do we know that's of particular importance to China, that's the most dangerous?
Well, they have, I mean, I'm not a scientist, so, you know, we could talk about PM1 particulates and others. And actually, that's part of the problem, is because you have scientists in China that disagree on the dangerousness of certain particulates. They say, okay, PM2 is dangerous, but we think this level is okay. Then the World Health Organization comes in and they say, well, actually, no, PM2 is not what you need to worry about. It's PM1 that you need to worry about, and it's very dangerous, and the levels that you have are higher than what you're saying. You'll remember not too long ago, China and the United States had a bit of a spat over the U.S. Embassy in Beijing actually posting pollution readings that were different from what the state did.
Right.
And China was telling its people, don't pay attention to what they're saying, listen to us. So, you know, there's a lot of scientific, just people can't agree about global warming, or I call it the climate crisis. So you have differences of opinion between organizations, whether they're Chinese, whether they're World Health Organization, et cetera, over what you need to worry about. I think everybody agrees, and if you look at Beijing, you know, you just have to step outside in Beijing anytime over the last 6 days, that it's dangerous.
Well, let's talk more about that, because there's some debate in the article about which cities are more polluted than the others, and Beijing certainly is one that's top of the list and has been getting a lot of coverage. But there's some talk about whether or not Beijing is more polluted than other cities where a lot of coal burning activity takes place, for instance.
Well, they talked about that in the article, and again, it's a matter of debate, because they say, okay, Shanghai is higher in one type of pollution than Beijing. So is that better or is that worse? And then Beijing is higher because it's closer to the northern, you know, coal burning areas, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then in Guangzhou, in Guangdong, down in that area, Shenzhen, Hong Kong. Hong Kong itself has a big problem. And that was one of the reasons my family and I decided to move to Singapore, is because we have a young son, didn't want to raise him in the pollution there. So it's, you know, again, whether it's a matter of debate. Okay, well, Shanghai during the springtime is not as bad as Beijing, and then Beijing in the winter, because the cold air affects things. You don't have the wind that's getting rid of, you know, that's moving the pollution offshore, things like that. It's all a matter of debate.
Overall, I mean, you know, the end result is that China still has to do something. It's going to take several years for them to be able to clean up the dangerous levels of pollution engulfing the country. But what can we learn from the data? What can we use the information that the researchers have provided to make any difference right now?
And again, it's a bit like the climate crisis. I mean, even if China quit burning coal tomorrow, they're still going to have problems. Whether their air pollution may go down a bit, but then they're still going to have huge amounts of water pollution because of factories doing different things as well. So there's no immediate solution. And again, the United States has problems as well because everybody loves coal. It's cheap. It's all the power plants can burn coal. And it's just a matter of, I mean, for me, it's China's big problem is how is it going to balance economic growth versus its environment, which is more important to them, which is more important to the people. And how are they going to keep the people happy, which is the key thing for China.
All right, well, we do have to move on to our next story. This one's your pick. The New York Times, this one's from Hong Kong editor whose ouster stirred protests is slashed. I think it's safe to say that press freedom is under threat in Hong Kong. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would agree with that. That's a very simple, easy answer, yes. Anybody who thinks China is not calling the shots in Hong Kong is naive. And I actually, it's one of my favorite stories because I lived there for quite a few years. I actually moved there just after the handover in 1997 and was at the Foreign Correspondents Club, my favorite place in Hong Kong. And I was talking to a photographer there and he said, "Oh, you just moved here. Well, you've missed the story." And I said, "Well, no, I think the story is yet to come because it's one thing to hand something back to somebody and it's another thing of how they deal with it." And I think we've seen in the intervening period since 1997 that China in many respects has stumbled, in some cases stumbled badly. I think in this particular case where you have, and this is not the first attack against media figures in Hong Kong, but I think in this particular case, I can't remember if it's a line from a play in Shakespeare, but who will rid me of this troublesome priest? And there are certain elements in Hong Kong society that Beijing doesn't need to make an order. They don't need to say, okay, I want you to go out and attack this guy, which they would never do. They would never do that. But Beijing says, who will rid me of this troublesome priest? And people, certain elements, react to that and take it upon themselves to say, we need to warn this guy.
But what do you think that the reaction is from people in Hong Kong and from journalists in Hong Kong who are going to be the most vocal people you have out there?
Well, the Hong Kong Journalists Association has come out strongly on this. The FCC, the Foreign Correspondents Club, again, they issued a statement. It's a huge thing, and I think people underestimate the potential for Hong Kong to become a flashpoint for China. And I think my own view is that Hong Kong will be the flashpoint, and I think trouble's ahead.
Possibly on June 4th as well this year, because of course it's the 25th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square incident.
Not just that, you also have this Occupy Central movement, which is calling for basically free and fair elections in 2017, no conditions imposed by Beijing. That's going to be a problem. And I think what will happen is you're going to have big protests, you're going to have marches, and I think what's going to happen is it's going to happen by accident. Some policeman's going to get scared, and he's going to accidentally or, wrongly shoot someone or beat someone or do something like that. Then the people get angry, they react. And so I don't think that Beijing is intentionally going to crack down hard like they did in Tiananmen Square.
But the simmering tensions.
But I think the tensions are heating up to the point where that is a real risk.
Right. I'm afraid we do have to move on to our next story. This one's from the Sydney Morning Herald. I was attacked for wearing Google Glass. This is quite an unusual story about privacy. A tech professional was attacked in San Francisco for wearing Google Glass in a bar. What do you make of that? Obviously, people aren't necessarily taking to the technology well, even though wearable technology, we've so often said, is the future.
Yeah, it is the future, and part of the problem is a couple of things. One, it was in San Francisco, where you have a big problem right now between sort of the haves and have-nots. You have young software engineers that are making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They're pricing real estate out of the market for people that have lived there for a long time. So you have this sort of social friction between those two camps. Number two, it is a matter of privacy. I don't know that I would feel comfortable with someone with Google Glass on, because you don't know whether they're recording or not. Maybe the light, maybe they disabled the light that comes on, so you don't know. But it reminds me, and actually because I'm a big film buff, there was a movie that came out in 2004 called Final Cut, starred Robin Williams, and it was about people, it takes it to the extreme, but people could get implants put in when they were born, and they recorded every second of their life. And then when they died, that information was given to an editor who would put together the final cut of this person's life. Now, that takes it to the extreme, but you can imagine we've already
that's where we're progressing.
That's where we're progressing.
And Google says that as time goes by, people become more accustomed to it and they'll become more accepting to it. Do you think that that's the case?
I think so, yeah. I think there will be, there will be the Luddites, the holdouts, people that won't, but it will get to the point where, your lapel button will be a camera, and it would get down to that small.
Everyone seems to be spying on one another.
Everyone seems to be spying on, and so, privacy is starting to be a thing of the past, unfortunately.
All right. Well, I'm afraid we do have to end it there. Thanks very much indeed for that. Matthew Driskill there speaking to us from Reuters, and that's it from First Look Asia. Do stay with the channel for M Live just ahead.